Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 27 based on novel. So let's start. Time seemed to slowly slip past as the water flowed. 2 hours quickly passed, however, there was still no activity. Han Xiaoshui yawned as she said in a bored voice, "Is he out of moves or something?" Ji Yu Hongyi frowned. As someone who has not tried practicing the ethereal form technique, can you cut down on your comments? Sensing apertures is not that easy, and he's even doing it for a dozen people. How strong do you think his spirit senses have to be? After being scolded by Ji Yu Hongyi, Han Xiaoshui could only pout unhappily as she viciously stared at Zhu Yuan and said, "Then I'll watch and see how long he can keep up this act." Time continued to flow, and another 2 hours swift past. Faint grumbling due to impatience could already be heard from both sides of the creek. Only the disciples that practiced the ethereal form technique before understood its difficulty and continued to wait in silence. Time continued to flow, and the 6-hour mark soon approached. Warm light fell from the sky, shining on Zhu Yuan's body, making the young man seem as if he was glowing brightly at this moment. It was at this very moment that Zhu Yuan's tightly shut eyes abruptly opened. "Release your control." Zhu Yuan's voice sounded in the ears of Xiao Xiao and the rest, causing their hearts to shake violently as they involuntarily gave up control of the Genesis Chi in their bodies. The instant this happened, they felt an external force direct the Genesis Chi in their bodies, guiding it through their channels. A dozen breaths later, their Genesis Chi suddenly turned, ferociously charging towards a certain spot in their bodies. At the moment of impact, Xiao Xiao, Zhu Yu and the rest suddenly felt a strong vibration spread from inside their bodies. Next, they were astonished to feel something being unblocked at the location that Genesis Chi had struck. An aperture had appeared within their senses. The Genesis Chi in their bodies began to dribble in little by little. Yes, it's really been unblocked. Xiao Xiao and the rest opened their eyes at this moment, eyes filled with disbelief. "Ha ha, it's been unblocked, the aperture has appeared." Some of the others were unable to hold back their emotions as they began to dance and laugh. An uproar exploded on both sides of the creek at this moment, every disciple dumbstruck by the outcome. What? Unblocked? He helped a dozen people unblock their apertures at the same time. Some of the disciples whom had practiced the ethereal form technique even jumped in shock, a stunned look on their faces as they mumbled, "This can't be true, right?" They clearly understood how troublesome and difficult it was to sense apertures. And yet, Zhu Yuan had just succeeded in helping not only one, but a dozen individuals sense their apertures at the same time. Just how strong were his senses? It can't be. Han Xiaoshui's mouth hung wide open, unable to stop herself from saying, "All of this must be part of an act, right?" After she said this, even she did not believe herself. After all, it was too easy to expose such an act. But if it wasn't an act, wouldn't mean it was real. Han Xiaoshui's eyes glimmered as she gazed at Zhu Yuan's figure and mumbled, "To think that he's truly so capable." The commotion did not stop for a long time, everyone stuck in shock. All of a sudden, everyone's burning gazes turned towards Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan turned a blind eye to these gazes as he tiredly massaged his forehead. Helping a dozen people at once had indeed exhausted his spirit. "Junior brother Zhu Yuan, you're way too amazing." Xiao Xiao's face was flushed with excitement. Beside him, the lips of the girl called Zhu Yu moved, the shock on her face yet to fade away completely. She had clearly been shocked silly by Zhu Yuan's feat. Zhu Yuan waved his hand at them, before lifting his head and looking towards the countless figures on both sides of the creek with a calm expression, as his indifferent voice sounded. "After my earlier testing, I've discovered that my ability is limited, so I've decided to restrict the maximum number to 100 individuals. I will no longer accept anyone once this number is reached." Zhu Yuan's words instantly caused his surroundings to fall silent. Numerous disciples blinked. Didn't this mean there were only 100 quotas? The silence only lasted for a few breaths, before suddenly being disrupted by a chaotic outbreak. One could only watch as figure after figure descended like locusts, heading straight for the creek, while frenzied shouts rang out one after another. "Me? I want to sign up." "Me too. Leak bro, please save a spot for me." Han Xiaoshui watched as mayhem descended upon the creek as she swallowed. Soon after, she smiled charmingly as she looked towards Ji Yu Hongyi and sweetly said, "Hongyi, you're quite close to Zhu Yuan. Help me ask for a spot." Ji Hongi rolled her eyes, before also casting her gaze towards that figure below as a faint smile rose from the corners of her lips. This guy was now going to be famous. It only took half a day for Zhu Yuan's feat of simultaneously helping a dozen people unblock their apertures to spread to the entire outer mountains. A commotion immediately swept through countless disciples, each and every one unable to believe the news. The disciples that had practiced the ethereal form technique were even more stupefied than their more ignorant counterparts. They were well aware that the hardest part of the technique was sensing the apertures, which required a tremendous amount of time. There were only 2 months left before the peak selection exam, and everyone was intensifying their efforts, making time become a more and more precious commodity. Many disciples had originally not taken it seriously, evidently believing that it was some kind of joke or farce. No one had imagined that this farce would result in such an outcome. By now, it had already been proven that Zhu Yuan did possess the ability to help others unblock their apertures. Hence, the numerous disciples that were practicing the ethereal form technique began to stir restlessly. A certain lecture hall in the rear mountain. Zhu Yu was currently explaining something to the disciples present when a disturbance was suddenly felt from outside. He immediately frowned slightly, but before he could say anything, someone barged in and shouted, "Zhu Yuan has simultaneously helped a dozen disciples unblock their apertures." The lecture hall was instantly flooded with noise, the numerous disciples within completely dumbstruck. Zhu Yu's reasoning from before had already convinced them that Zhu Yuan was merely a fraud. Who could have imagined that he would really succeed? The many disciples in the lecture hall looked to each other. In the end, their gazes eventually turned towards Zhu Yu, looking at him in a strange manner. Zhu Yu was clearly also stunned by the news, but his expression soon turned extremely dark and stormy. The corners of his mouth twitched uncontrollably, a clear sign of the violent rage that had surged out in his heart. But he ultimately took in a deep breath, suppressing the alarm and anger inside as he said in an icy voice, "Humph, that kid probably found some actors to put on a show with him." At this time, he would never accept that Zhu Yuan was more capable than himself. However, the many disciples did not speak this time, their gazes flickering in thought. They understood that it was basically impossible for Zhu Yuan to pull off any tricks with so many people watching. Zhu Yu was just being stubbornly unreasonable. Wouldn't this mean that Zhu Yuan did possess the astonishing capability to help others reach the first level of the ethereal form technique in a month? Everyone's hearts began to beat a little faster. If so, wouldn't this give them an advantage over others? In addition, they had heard it only cost 3 Genesis jade pieces a day there, a much more competitive price than Zhu Yu's 5 Genesis jade pieces. The atmosphere in the lecture hall had become rather bizarre. Although many were tempted, no one dared to display their true feelings for the time being. After all, Zhu Yu was here watching them, and it would not be good to offend him. When all was said and done, he was an inner mountain disciple. While the situation fell into a deadlock of sorts, the one who had barged in spoke again. "I've also heard that Zhu Yuan has set a quota, and will only be accepting 100 people. Once it's full, he will not be teaching anyone else asterisk." Many were no longer able to sit still after hearing these words. The number of disciples practicing the ethereal from technique in the outer mountains had already surpassed 100. If others beat them to it, won't they lose this chance? The veins on Zhu Yu's forehead twitched violently, his gaze akin to a knife as he looked towards the one who had spoken. The latter's head seemed to shrink back, before he hurriedly escaped. However, it was already too late. The hearts of the disciples inside the lecture hall had already begun to stir, no longer possible to repress. "Ayya, I have a stomachache. I have to go to the toilet." One of the disciples suddenly clutched his stomach, pale-faced as he stood up and began staggering towards the exit. Another equally quick-witted disciple weakly said, "I'm also feeling a little unwell all of a sudden. It may be an inner injury I sustained in a practice bout yesterday. I'll be leaving first to rest." "Come here, my good brother, how can you be so careless? I'll help you back to rest." The lecture hall immediately descended into chaos, all kinds of excuses flying left and right. None of the disciples dared to look at Zhu Yu as they began to slip away one after another. In a short few minutes, the originally slightly squeezy lecture hall had become quite empty. Zhu Yu's body trembled uncontrollably in anger as he watched the clearly acting disciples leave like a whirlwind. Did they think he was clueless? Every one of these bastards was likely rushing to Zhu Yuan the moment they stepped out the door. "Elder brother, what do we do?" Zhu Feng watched everything happen with a pale face. He did not expect Zhu Yuan to be so merciless, forcing them into such a miserable state all of a sudden. Zhu Yu tightly gritted his teeth as a sliver of regret flitted past in his eyes. If he knew Zhu Yuan would be such a huge problem, he would not have offended the latter due to some petty little squabble of Zhu Feng's. However, he knew that there was no use regretting anything now, and his expression immediately turned ferocious. Zhu Yuan, since you dare to cut off my income, don't blame me for what I will do. He had spent a great deal of effort to land this cushy job in the outer mountains. But now that everything had been ruined by Zhu Yuan, he would not take things lying down. Or he would likely become a laughingstock if this matter spread to the inner mountains. A seemingly endless stream of outer mountain disciples rushed towards a certain mountain creek. The area around the creek was already a huge mess. Zhu Yuan stood somewhere to the rear, leaving the administrative matters to Shen Wanjin, while Qiao Xiu and his group also helped out where they could. After an hour, only 10 of the 100 quotas were left. It was at this moment that another wave of disciples began to swarm over, turning the place even more chaotic as they struggled to obtain the final 10 quotas. In fact, some of the disciples even began to fight. Shen Wanjin's eyes spun in thought when he saw this. With a dry cough, he said, "Since no one is willing to give in, we'll auction off the last 10 quotas. They will go to the highest bidder, and the bidding will start at 3 Genesis jade pieces a day." He could tell that the ones who had rushed over at this time mostly composed of Xingju disciples. These people were pretty rich, but most importantly, they had not believed Zhu Yuan earlier, hence why it had taken them so long to come. Although Zhu Yuan did not really care, Shen Wanjin felt that he could not let these people have such an easy time, hence why he had come up with such a ruthless move. These disciples glared at Shen Wanjin in anger when they heard this, evidently realizing the latter's intentions. But even if they knew, for the sake of the quotas, they could not be bothered too much at such a time. One of the Xingju disciples quickly shouted, "I bid 4 Genesis jade pieces." "I bid 5 pieces." Another gritted his teeth and followed. This price was already the same as Zhu Yu's place, but since Zhu Yuan was more effective, the price was still within an acceptable level. 6 pieces. In the end, however, there was someone even fiercer, snatching away the quota with a bid of 6 Genesis jade pieces. Numerous disciples secretly wet their lips at the sight of this. 6 Genesis jade pieces a day meant a total of 180 by the time one was done in a month. This was a huge, painful price. With the exception of the first quota being bidded away, at a price of 6 Genesis jade pieces, the other quotas stabilized at about 5 pieces. As such, a handsome sum was easily earned. Zhu Yuan chuckled inside as he watched. Shen Wanjin was indeed good at ripping others off. After the auction of the last 10 quotas, Shen Wanjin announced that they would no longer be accepting any more students. The numerous disciples that had yet to sign up began to sigh repeatedly, feeling disappointed inside. Only now did they regret not believing Zhu Yuan earlier. Though they were disappointed, no one tried to stir up any trouble. It was likely that after witnessing Zhu Yuan's capability, these outer mountain disciples now had some respect towards him. After all, everyone still hoped to receive guidance from him, and naturally would not dare to offend him. As such, peace finally began to slowly return to the long chaotic area around the creek. Shen Wanjin grinned from ear to ear as he practically sprinted over, a large sack hoisted over his back. The clear tinkling of Genesis jade pieces could be heard from within, an extremely beautiful sound indeed. He allowed the sack to land with a loud thud in front of Zhu Yuan and said, "Little Yuan bro, everything is basically in order. Here's the fees for tomorrow, a sum of over 300 Genesis jade pieces." Saliva seemed to flow down from his mouth as he spoke. This was only the first day. In a month, Zhu Yuan would have earned nearly 10,000 Genesis jade pieces, an enormous sum even to the numerous inner mountain disciples. Zhu Yuan could not help but sigh. It had been way too easy to earn these Genesis jade pieces. With their support, he could finally squander money as he pleased. With a flick, Genesis Chi wrapped around 100 pieces in the sack and sent them flying towards Shen Wanjin, Qiao Xiu and the rest. "You guys have worked hard today. Don't reject this tiny bit of goodwill, all of you should know that it's really nothing to me." Shen Wanjin, Qiao Xiu and the rest were just about to decline, but stopped themselves after hearing Zhu Yuan's words. After all, they did need these Genesis jade pieces. Zhu Yuan smiled and said, "All of you should come here again from tomorrow onwards. I will help you guys with the ethereal form technique." Qiao Xiu, Shen Wanjin and the rest nodded. After seeing this, Zhu Yuan did not waste any more time. He kept the sack of Genesis jade and leisurely turned around, leaving the creek and heading back to his little house. Now that I have the money, I can have my every meal at the 100 Fragrances house. Zhu Yuan chuckled softly. He was not a gourmet, but after the benefits from the nutritious food of the 100 Fragrances house, he strolled through the mountains, arriving back at his little house. When he reached his destination, however, he was suddenly stunned. On a stone table in front of the little house, Yao Yao was elegantly seated while carrying Tunton, a serious look on her gorgeous face, while an old man in grey sat opposite her. The elder's face was also solemn as he stared at the jade board on the stone table. Both he and Yao Yao were holding Genesis rune brushes. Zhu Yuan had been stunned by this strange scene. What were they doing? He stealthily approached and looked over, only to see stroke after stroke being drawn as Yao Yao and the elder's brushes descended. The drawn strokes were similar to a game of Go, each one trying to devour the other. These two were having a game of Genesis runes. As the two Genesis rune brushes danced on the jade board, stroke after stroke took shape and began to attack one another as if they were on a battlefield, while a kind of desperation seemed to spread within the silence. A contest based on Genesis runes like this was not affected by how strong one's spirit cultivation was, and purely relied on one's understanding of Genesis runes. Zhu Yuan stood behind Yao Yao, amazement in his eyes as he watched their game unfurl. He could faintly sense the brilliance behind every stroke that was laid down, a feat that required extremely high mastery of Genesis runes. At the very least, the majority of the strokes made the area between his brows seem to swell in pain. Who is this old man? It's hard to believe he's able to compete in Genesis runes with big sis Yao Yao. Zhu Yuan looked in astonishment at the solemn-looking old man in grey. Yao Yao's Genesis rune mastery was practically immeasurable. In fact, this was the first time he had seen Yao Yao's serious appearance. However, the elder in grey was clearly having a very hard time against the serious Yao Yao, as could be seen from the intense look on his face. The two went at it as if possessed, the deadlock lasting for an incense stick of time. Yao Yao gently stroked Tunton's soft fur as she glanced at the elder and said, "Old mister, you've been attacking for so long without any breakthrough, why keep stubbornly persisting?" The elder in grey huffed at his beard, seemingly on the verge of hiding his face in shame as he retorted, "Don't be so conceited, little girl, I merely held myself back, because you're a junior." Yao Yao's red lips curled downwards. "Old mister, the only gap between us is in our spirit cultivation, which is only there because you have the advantage of age. If we were to solely compare Genesis rune mastery and foundations, I'm afraid that you may not be able to beat me." The elder's voice was tinged with embarrassment and anger. "Little girl, don't think that you can spout whatever nonsense you want just because you're pretty. You weren't even born when I was learning Genesis runes." Yao Yao nonchalantly said, "You've trained for so long, and yet you can't even beat me. I can only say that old mister still has plenty of room for improvement." Her voice sounded gentle, but her words were mercilessly. The elder huffed angrily as he glared at her. With a wave of his sleeve, the strokes on the jade board were wiped clean as he snorted and said, "I'll be going back to research some things for a bit. I'll break your defense next time." Behind Yao Yao, Zhu Yuan could not help but laugh. This old man's skin was really thick, to think that he would even resort to such tactics. Upon hearing Zhu Yuan's laughter, the old man in grey glared at him, a faint threatening pressure rising. Zhu Yuan was taken aback, his laughter coming to an immediate stop as he looked towards the elder in uncertainty. This old man did not seem to be ordinary. "You can flaunt your power after beating me," said Yao Yao at this moment. Upon hearing Yao Yao's blunt words, the elder in grey could not help but say, "Do you know who I am, little girl? You dare to say such things to me?" "Don't know. Don't care." A faint smile rose on Yao Yao's beautiful face. The elder glared daggers at her for a long time, before letting out a bitter laugh. "How did a weirdo like you appear in this batch of outer mountain disciples? But your mastery over Genesis runes is indeed exceedingly amazing. It seems that you've learnt from someone else, right?" The elder's tone seemed to hint at something deeper. Yao Yao indifferently responded, "Why? Does that Sangshuan sect not allow us to bring our own skills in?" The elder in grey chuckled. "We do permit it. That Sangshuan sect accepts anyone as long as they harbor no ill intent towards us." He smiled as he continued, "Little girl, I've seen how outstanding your Genesis rune talent is. Are you interested in entering the Spirit Rune Peak? If you are, I can recommend you now, and let you directly become an Inner Mountain disciple. Zhu Yuan was slightly shocked. To become Inner Mountain disciples, one had to go through that peak selection ceremony. The old man before them could allow one to bypass this important test. Looks like his status was not low at all. Zhu Yuan was already aware that the Spirit Rune Peak was one of the 7 peaks of the Zhangshuan sect. It was a rather unique peak, as all of its disciples focused solely on Genesis runes. It was said that the sect's cultivation paradise, Genesis Mountain, was one of the works of the Spirit Rune Peak. Yao Yao glanced at the elder and shook her head. Not interested. The elder in grey was stunned, never expecting that Yao Yao would be such a character. She clearly did not care about this chance to directly become an Inner Mountain disciple. He extended a finger and pointed at Yao Yao for a long time. In the end, he shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "Fine, do as you want. You only need to let me know if you ever become interested in joining the Spirit Rune Peak in the future. My Spirit Rune Peak has numerous ancient Genesis runes, and we can be said to have abundant resources." One could tell that he had become very fond of Yao Yao's talent. After all, the Genesis rune talent she displayed had truly taken his breath away. None of the disciples he had encountered in the past had ever displayed such amazing talent. At the words ancient Genesis runes, Yao Yao's eyes seemed to move, but she eventually shook her head. Zhu Yuan needed to enter the Saint Genesis Peak to obtain the second Saint rune, hence, she was not willing to go somewhere else. The elder in grey helplessly chuckled, no longer trying to convince her. Your Genesis strokes have a certain uniqueness to them. I'll go back and research how to deal with them. He slowly stood up, and suddenly looked at Zhu Yuan. As for you, you've been causing quite a ruckus in the outer mountains recently. He began to size up Zhu Yuan as he continued to speak. However, the fact that you were able to help others sense apertures is indicative of your ability. Only someone with extremely sharp spirit senses will be able to do so. Zhu Yuan smiled, but did not say anything. He was naturally not going to reveal the existence of the decoder Saint rune. The two of you are not simple at all, remarked the elder in grey with a grin, before he turned around and slowly left. Zhu Yuan watched him leave and asked, "Big sis Yao Yao, who is he?" Yao Yao lazily yawned before replying, "No idea. I was studying Genesis runes here earlier, when he suddenly popped out and said he wanted to teach me. So I told him that is not good enough to be my teacher. Then he got angry, and wanted to compete with me in Genesis runes. In the end, he was unable to win." Zhu Yuan's mouth opened and closed. "Big sis Yao Yao, you really are a domineering tyrant." The elder in grey was clearly not ordinary, and likely had pretty high status in the Zhangshuan sect. And yet you so bluntly told him that is not good enough. Thank God his temper isn't bad, or he would have flipped. Zhu Yuan shook his head, deciding not to dwell on this matter. With a smile, he said, "Forget about him. Let's go. I'll bring you guys to the 100 Fragrances house to eat to your heart's content today." He patted the universe bag at his waist and said in a rather pleased manner, "We've got money now." Roar. There wasn't much of a response from Yao Yao, but Tuntin roared excitedly, its beady beast eyes glowing brightly. They had passed by the 100 Fragrances house quite a few times previously, and Tuntin had always tried to dash in again. However, it was forcibly dragged back by the prepared Zhu Yuan, because he really could not afford it at that time. Since he had just made a killing, Zhu Yuan naturally intended on rewarding Tuntin. After all, if Zhu Feng suddenly went crazy and decided to seek Zhu Yuan out, he would have to throw Tuntin out and let it do its work. The area around the creek became extremely lively during the subsequent few days. Over 100 disciples would gather here at a specific time, while numerous others also came over to observe. Zhu Yuan would spend some time every day helping everyone unblock their apertures. However, due to the number of people, it had become much more troublesome to sense apertures even with the power of the decoder Saint rune, causing his efficiency to drop. Even so, he was able to maintain a speed of 1 to 2 apertures per day for everyone. Though Zhu Yuan was a little unsatisfied with this pace, the disciples that had come for his help were delighted by it, emotions and excitement often flushing their faces. After all, they would usually take quite a few days to unblock a single aperture. In comparison, the rate at Zhu Yuan's place was clearly much faster. At this speed, the first level promised by Zhu Yuan would definitely be reached in a month. Hence, as the days passed, the gazes of numerous disciples seemed to burn hotter and hotter when they looked towards Zhu Yuan, and there was even an additional trace of admiration now present in their eyes. Zhu Yuan had used reality to prove his ability. After each daily training session, the elated disciples would brag about their progress to those whom had been unable to obtain a spot, causing the latter to be madly envious, and so regretful that they felt as if it would be better to die. If they had believed in Zhu Yuan a little earlier, they would not be in their current predicament where even a spot was out of their grasp. At this rate, the disciples receiving guidance from Zhu Yuan would very likely reach the first level of the ethereal form technique in a month. By that time, the gap between them would become clear. Those originally stronger disciples may soon be surpassed by others. Such thoughts made the many disciples who practiced the ethereal form technique very anxious. Moreover, the progress at Zhu Yu's place seemed to be growing slower and slower recently, although they still had to pay the same considerable tuition fees. Therefore, some of the disciples withdrew from Zhu Yu's classes and began to save up Genesis Jade, waiting for Zhu Yuan's next round of recruitment. As such, although far more than 100 outer mountain disciples were practicing the ethereal form technique, the disciples at Zhu Yu's place gradually lessened. In the end, only a meager dozen disciples were left, a pretty pitiful sight indeed. Hence, while the many lectures halls in the rear mountain remained abuzz with activity, only Zhu Yu's place appeared rather lonely and desolate. The other inner mountain disciple instructors were secretly alarmed by this scene, all of them committing Zhu Yuan's name to heart. When Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu clashed previously, they had naturally felt that a mere outer mountain disciple could not possibly be so capable. Hence, they had unhesitatingly chose to support Zhu Yu when he asked for their help. But now, that decision of theirs did seem rather foolish. Zhu Yuan was clearly no Samaritan. Wasn't it clear already what state Zhu Yu had fallen to after clashing with the former? As inner mountain disciples, they understood what a great job it was to teach Genesis techniques in the outer mountains, and numerous inner mountain disciples would fight tooth and nail for it. Zhu Yu had paid a tremendous price to obtain this cushy job, but who could have expected things to end up like this? Zhu Yuan should not be provoked. The sight of Zhu Yu's lonely and desolate lecture hall made the other inner mountain disciple instructors sigh inside. As a result, they would occasionally sing praises about Zhu Yuan while giving their lectures, hoping that it would eventually travel to Zhu Yuan's ears as a show of goodwill. The previous lecture ban on Zhu Yuan also quietly disappeared. Zhu Yu's fate had clearly frightened them. No one knew whether Zhu Yuan was also capable of teaching other techniques. If they pushed him too far, and he began to teach their Genesis techniques too, Zhu Yu's case was already a prime example of what could happen. In Zhu Yu's lecture hall, Zhu Yu's expression was ashen as he gazed at his lonely lecture hall. The dozen or so figures within looked rather distracted, and did not seem to have any intentions of diligently learning. Who knew where their minds were at this moment? Zhu Feng looked towards Zhu Yu and anxiously said, "Elder brother, we can't continue like this, or no one will come here anymore." Zhu Yu's Genesis technique lectures was a great source of income, while the younger brother was also able to obtain a tidy sum for himself. This allowed Zhu Feng to lead an extremely comfortable life in the outer mountains, numerous disciples often gathering around and flattering him. Now that Zhu Yu was being repeatedly suppressed by Zhu Yuan, the former's Genesis Jade income had received a huge hit, making the Zhu Feng's situation very awkward. Zhu Yu remained expressionless, but blazing rage burned in the depths of his eyes. He peered into the distance, seemingly crossing numerous mountains to see the bustling scene at the creek. Compared to the desolateness here, it was akin to night and day. Zhu Yu glanced at Zhu Feng and emotionlessly said, "A mere outer mountain disciples thinks he can trod all over me. Looks like I'll need to teach him about respect for his seniors." Before his words faded, he had already began walking out of the lecture hall. Zhu Yu descended the rear mountain, ultimately arriving at the highest mountain in the mountain range, where he came to a stop in front of a courtyard at the waist of the mountain. In the stone pavilion within it, Chen Yuan smiled when he saw Zhu Yu and said, "It seems that you can't take it any longer." Zhu Yu cupped his fists together in greeting before he walked forward. He did not speak, but merely retrieved a big case and placed it on the tablet. As he lifted the lid, an interior lined full of Genesis Jade pieces was revealed. Zhu Yu finally said, "Teacher Uncle Chen, I hope that you will kindly accept these 2,000 Genesis Jade pieces." Chen Yuan reached out a hand to caress the cooling Genesis Jade pieces as he grinned. "You're the one who best understands the proper way one should act." His cast a glance in a certain direction as he shook his head. The new kids are all full of youthful vigor, and have yet to learn the importance of the rules. Some of them gained so many benefits out of the blue, but do not know that they should give offerings to show some respect. A mocking look rose from the corners of his mouth. Zhu Yu chuckled. The youngsters only just arrived at the Tsangshuan sect, and do not clearly understand where they stand. They might be under the impression that they are still in the same remote continent from before, and can act as the same genius everyone flatters. That's why they are unable to understand how to behave properly. Chen Yuan nodded with a wide smile. What do you plan on doing? Although that brat is arrogant, truth be told, he is not breaking any of the sect's rules. A smile rose from the corners of Zhu Yu's mouth. Although there is no rule that says an outer mountain disciple doesn't have the right to teach, teacher Uncle Chen should not forget that there is another rule that states only one person is needed to teach one Genesis technique. Chen Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. There is such a rule, but that kid is just an outer mountain disciple. Do you intend to bully him out with force? If so, people will say an inner mountain disciple is bullying an outer mountain disciple. Zhu Yu softly chuckled. If I wanted to use such a method, he would have stomped into the ground long ago. He looked towards Chen Yuan and said, didn't the kid brag that he's pretty good at the ethereal form technique? I don't need to compete with him in other aspects, only the ethereal form technique. The better one will naturally be the better instructor. What do you think, teacher Uncle Chen? Chen Yuan could not help but laugh when he heard this. A competition solely based on the ethereal form technique. You are pretty smart. Although it was said that Zhu Yuan had reached the first level, Zhu Yu had been practicing the technique for 2 years. No matter how talented Zhu Yuan was, he could not possibly surpass Zhu Yu in less than a month, right? In addition, Zhu Yu had chosen a Genesis technique competition. Since no Genesis Qi was involved, it would not be seen as bullying, and would be within the limits of acceptability if news of it were to spread. Fine, do as you please. Chen Yuan nodded. Chen Yuan was also not very fond of the upstart brat that had been causing a ruckus recently. Most importantly, the brat was completely ignorant of how the world functioned, and did not know how to show respect to one's seniors. Hence, Chen Yuan did not mind letting him learn the harsh ways of society. I will spread the word that the two of you will compete based on the ethereal form technique in 5 days. Whoever wins will become the only ethereal form technique instructor in the outer mountains. Joy finally flooded Zhu Yu's eyes when he heard this. He lifted his head and looked in the direction of the mountain creek, as chillingness and ridicule flitted across in the depths of his eyes. Zhu Yuan, if you want to fight, I have ways to toy with you to death. News that Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu would compete based on Genesis technique to see who should possess the right to be an instructor of the ethereal form technique very quickly spread to the entirety of the outer mountains. This matter undoubtedly led to a huge uproar. The sharper individuals could already see that this was Zhu Feng's counterattack. Although everyone knew that Zhu Yuan was extremely talented in the ethereal form technique, at the end of the day, he had only been practicing it for less than a month. Zhu Yu, on the other hand, had spent nearly 2 years on it. No matter how one looked at it, a competition purely based on technique was completely in Zhu Yu's favor. This is too shameless. Does being at a higher level in the ethereal form technique means he will surely be a better teacher? Yeah, Zhu Yuan can train you to the first level in a month. Can Zhu Yu do that? Zhu Yu is clearly causing trouble on purpose. Countless whispers spread in the outer mountains, especially from the disciples that hoped to obtain Zhu Yuan's guidance, all of them of one mind as they spoke up for Zhu Yuan. After all, training with Zhu Yuan was not only cheaper, but also more effective. If Zhu Yuan's right to teach was taken, they would have no choice but to return to Zhu Yu. An outcome that would undoubtedly waste more time and Genesis Jade. However, their opposition was unable to amount to anything. After all, the disciples that practiced the ethereal form technique was only a fraction in the entire outer mountains. Even more disciples were waiting to be entertained, especially the Xingju disciples. Zhu Yuan's reputation had grown too great recently, making them slightly unhappy. Hence, they were naturally more than happy to watch him being suppressed by Zhu Yu. In addition, this was a matter decided by the outer mountain manager, Chen Yuan, so none of the disciples could object. By the mountain creek. News of the Genesis technique competition swiftly spread to this place and landed in Zhu Yuan's ears. Zhu Yuan was seated on a rock, pretty much no change in his expression. However, the 100 or so disciples before him immediately burst into noise. Zhu Yu is too much. Do we have to even ask him where we're allowed to train the ethereal form technique? His place is so expensive and so inefficient, who would want to go there? Jiyu Hongyi also frowned slightly. She came to Zhu Yuan's side and said, Juyu's bullying is intolerable. I can't believe that he decided on this competition without notifying you or seeking your opinion. This information had only reached Zhu Yuan's ears when it was being spread. From this, one could see that Zhu Yu clearly did not care about Zhu Yuan's opinions. Zhu Yuan smiled faintly. I've clearly been an eyesore to someone for quite some time. There was no way that Zhu Yu would be able to decide on this match, with just his inner mountain disciple status alone. Everything had to first be approved by the outer mountain manger, Chen Yuan. What are your plans? There was some worry in Jiyu Hongyi's bright eyes. Although Zhu Yuan had mastered the first level of the ethereal form technique, Zhu Yu had reached this level long ago. Moreover, although it was not a real fight, but a Genesis technique match, the odds were clearly still stacked against Zhu Yuan. Since my opponent has thrown out this move, I will naturally have to receive it. Zhu Yuan grinned. He knew long in advance that Zhu Yu would never let this matter rest. His source of income had been cut off by Zhu Yuan after all. Zhu Yuan also understood that he needed to eliminate Zhu Yu in order to continue earning Genesis Jade. Now that the other party had played his hand, it was undoubtedly Zhu Yuan's best chance to remove the former. Since both of them were eyeing the Genesis Jade income from teaching the ethereal form technique, one of them would naturally have to be eliminated. It was not that Zhu Yuan had not considered teaching another Genesis technique, but if he did so, he would offend even more people. He was currently only an outer mountain disciple, so there was no need for him to be so greedy. Jiyu Hongyi rather admired the fact that there was no fear on Zhu Yuan's face, but worry still flooded her eyes. She understood that no matter how pathetic Zhu Yu was, he was still an inner mountain disciple. I previously heard Zhu Yu say that he has already unblocked 41 apertures. However, he may have been hiding his true strength. Jiyu Hongyi told Zhu Yuan the information she knew. Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. Someone as devious as him will not reveal his bottom line so easily. 41 apertures was likely just a front, or Zhu Yu would not have so confidently fixed a Genesis technique match, while clearly knowing that Zhu Yuan had also reached the first level. It was obvious that Zhu Yu was confident in his abilities. Zhu Yu may have his confidence, but Zhu Yuan too should not be looked down upon. Zhu Yuan's gaze turned towards the clamoring crowd below as he said in a calm voice, no need to be alarmed. Since Zhu Yu wants a competition, I'll just have to accept. Upon hearing that Zhu Yuan was going to accept the match, the numerous disciples looked to each other in dismay, seeing the worried looks in everyone's eyes as they began to speak in low voices. They were clearly afraid that Zhu Yuan would lose, giving them no option but to return to Zhu Yu. However, since the competition was already set in stone, their worry would not change anything. The only thing left was to nervously wait for the match in 5 days. The crowd dispersed after the training was over, but some whispers could still be heard. One could imagine how the Genesis technique competition in 5 days would soon become the focal point of the entire Outer Mountains. Zhu Yuan ignored all of this as he headed back to his little house. In front of the little house, the Elder in Grey came here daily to engage in a match of Genesis runes with Yao Yao on the jade board. After each vicious clash, he would leave in a carefree manner. Zhu Yuan stood behind Yao Yao as he gazed upon the jade board. The swelling pain from his spirit grew increasingly intense, as if something was brewing within. Zhu Yuan knew that it was likely a sign that his spirit was about to step into the corporeal stage. Observing the Genesis rune game between the two of them for the past few days had clearly been very beneficial to him. As another game approached its end, there was still not clear victor between the two. The Elder in Grey sighed in regret, the admiration in his eyes growing even greater, as he looked towards Yao Yao and said, I really want to know who taught you. Can't believe your Genesis Chi mastery had reached such a high level at this young age. If your spirit cultivation rises, your accomplishments on the path of Genesis runes will be unimaginable. There was still no change in Yao Yao's flawless face despite his praise. Only laziness could be sensed from on her seemingly glowing fair skin. Yao Yao suddenly asked, Old Mister should be one of the 2 Outer Mountain elders, right? The elder was stunned, somewhat surprised as he replied, How did you know? Yao Yao's red lips parted slightly as she answered, There are 2 elders in the Outer Mountains that possess the highest authority, but they usually do not bother with ordinary matters, leaving everything to Chen Yuan. Your Genesis rune mastery is equally as good as mine. Even being an elder in the outer mountains is a little unbecoming for you. The elder in grey chuckled. Little one, are you indirectly praising yourself? Soon after, he nodded. My name is Zhong Ming, and I am indeed an outer mountain elder. Zhu Yuan looked at the former in amazement, clearly never expecting the old man's status to be so high. An outer mountain elder was pretty much the highest authority in the outer mountains. Even Chen Yuan would not dare to speak against him. Yao Yao placed a hand on her sharp chin as she said, Since you're an outer mountain elder, I want to inquire why two of you have not done anything with regards to Chen Yuan repeatedly targeting Zhu Yuan. The elder in grey playfully said, Why? You want to lodge a complaint? Yao Yao nonchalantly said, This Genesis technique match of Chen Yuan's clearly does not conform to the rules. The elder in grey, Zhong Ming, chuckled. Who asked this brat to be so greedy? To think that he intends on eating up all of Zhu Yu's pie. As he chuckled, he looked towards Zhu Yuan. But since she has spoken, I can cancel the match if you don't want to participate. Zhu Yuan merely smiled upon hearing this. He quickly shook his head and said, There's no need to cancel it. I only hope that it will be a fair match. Chen Yuan seemed to rather dislike Zhu Yuan, hence the latter wanted to prevent any unexpected trouble during the match. Surprise flitted across Zhong Ming's eyes, clearly not expecting Zhu Yuan to be so unafraid. The former immediately asked in an interested manner, You actually dare to compete with Zhu Yu in the ethereal form technique? If we are to compete based on Genesis Chi, the current me will not be able to match him. But if it is the ethereal form technique, it will not be so easy for him to beat me. Teaching a Genesis technique is a delicious pie indeed, it's really hard for me to return it after having a slice. Just like how Zhu Yu wants to kick me out, I too want to get rid of him and enjoy the pie alone. Zhong Ming looked towards Zhu Yuan and grinned, You're young, but your ambitions are not small. In the end, he nodded. Although I do not know where your confidence comes from, you do not need to worry. No one will be able to try anything funny during this Genesis technique competition, because I'll be personally overseeing it. Zhong Ming stood up, smiling as he looked at Yao Yao and Zhu Yuan. I don't know why, but I have the feeling that Sangshuan sect will become very lively with you two little ones here. With a wave of his hand, he turned around and left. Only after watching him leave did Yao Yao finally lift her head and look towards Zhu Yuan. Are you confident in your chances? Zhu Yu will likely be prepared. Zhu Yuan grinned slightly. Relax. I was originally planning on renting out the 9 Dragons cannon sometime during the next few days, but it looks like I'll have to focus all of my efforts on the ethereal form technique. His eyes were suffused with an icy light. When the time comes, I'll give Zhu Yu a pleasant surprise. In the following 5 days, the Genesis technique match between Zhu Yuan and Zhu Feng had undoubtedly become the focus of the entire Outer Mountains. It was the most popular topic for a time, drawing the attention of countless disciples. No one had expected Zhu Yu to counterattack in such a manner. But it was undoubtedly a very smart move. If it was only a Genesis technique competition, no one could say that Zhu Yu was using his superior might to bully Zhu Yuan. However, things were not looking good for Zhu Yuan. From what everyone could see, no matter how talented Zhu Yuan was in the ethereal form technique, he would not be able to match Zhu Yu, whom had not stopped walking on this path for nearly 2 years. After all, someone who could become an inner mountain disciple would not be an easy opponent. Many of the outer mountain disciples felt that it was such a pity. If Zhu Yuan lost, they would have no choice but to return to Zhu Yu's place to learn the ethereal form technique. This video will end here.